Dad and daughter vanish on vacation. 22 years later, the mother receives a shocking letter. 22 years ago, a mother's young daughter and husband vanished during a family vacation, leaving her trapped in relentless grief. For over 2 decades, she lived with unanswered questions and an ache that never faded. Then one day, an unexpected letter arrived. Her hands shook and her breath caught as she read its contents. What she discovered about her daughter's disappearance was more shocking than anything she could have imagined, a revelation that would change everything. Let us know where you're watching from today, and if you enjoy stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe. Evelyn Harper, a 65-year-old woman with tired eyes and streaks of gray in her hair, stepped cautiously into her new house in California. She clutched a small box containing a thick envelope filled with documents. The air was heavy with the scent of cardboard and fresh paint, starkly different from the comforting smells of her old home in New York. Larger moving boxes were scattered around, a clear sign of the monumental change she was undertaking. As Evelyn entered the dining room, one of the movers approached, a young man with a friendly smile. "Let me take that for you, ma'am," he offered, reaching for the box in her hands. Evelyn shook her head, managing a faint smile. "No, thank you. It's not heavy, just some old family photos and paperwork." Her voice carried a note of weariness, with a hint of protectiveness over the memories she carried. She placed the box gently on the dining table, while the mover held out a clipboard. "If you could just sign this completion form, ma'am," he said, handing her a pen. Evelyn's eyes caught on the moving cost, $3,500. The number seemed to mock her, a stark reminder of the distance between her past life in New York and her uncertain future in California. With a slightly trembling hand, she signed the form and handed over the payment. "Thank you, ma'am," the mover said, tipping his hat. "Good luck settling in." With that, he and his colleagues departed, leaving Evelyn alone in the unfamiliar house. She stood quietly for a moment, listening to the creaks and settling sounds of her new home. Taking a deep breath, she pulled the plastic covering off the dining table and chairs, familiar furniture that brought her a small measure of comfort amidst the sea of change. Before she could open the box, the sound of the front door opening broke the silence. Her sister, Angela Harper, entered, arms full of grocery bags. "I brought supplies," Angela called, her warm voice filling the house. "Thought we could cook tonight, save us from eating out while we focus on unpacking." Evelyn managed a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, Angela. That's thoughtful of you." Angela placed the bags on the kitchen counter and made her way to Evelyn, concern etched across her face. "How are you feeling, Eve? I know this can't be easy, selling the old family house in New York and moving all the way out here." Evelyn's shoulders sagged. "I've been wrestling with this decision for years, Angela. And now that it's finally done," her voice faltered, breaking slightly. "I thought I'd feel ready, but it turns out you're never truly prepared for something like this." Angela placed a comforting hand on her sister's shoulder. "It's been 22 years, Evelyn. You've held on for so long." Evelyn nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "And for 22 years, I kept hoping, expecting, that I'd hear something about Matthew and Lola." The names of her missing husband and daughter hung in the air like a heavy weight. Angela was silent for a moment, her own grief flickering across her face. Then, she squeezed Evelyn's shoulder gently. "I'll make us something hearty tonight," Angela said softly. "Don't worry about unpacking for now. We'll take it slow, together." Evelyn's gratitude surged, and she embraced her sister tightly. "I'm sorry for being so lost in my own sadness," she whispered. "I know this hasn't been easy for you either, especially after losing John last year." Angela returned the hug, her voice gentle. "I'm trying to let go too, Evelyn. Renting out my old house and moving in with you, it was the right call. That house held so many good memories, but the bad ones started to overshadow them. I couldn't move on if I stayed there." Her hands trembled as she carefully checked the envelope again. This time, she discovered a larger ultrasound picture she hadn't noticed before. As they examined it together, Evelyn spotted details she'd missed in her initial shock. "Look," she said, pointing to the lower corner of the image. It says the baby is 37 weeks, almost due. Angela leaned in, her eyes scanning the photo closely. Evelyn, she said slowly, do you see this? The patient name, Nain Colton. Evelyn's heart sank for a moment before she quickly regained her composure. But who would send me a fake letter with a fake ultrasound 22 years after my family disappeared? It doesn't make sense. Her finger traced another detail on the image. And look here, the date of birth. October 18th. That's Lola's birthday. Angela frowned, clearly trying to piece it all together. There's no sender address on the letter. Evelyn, could it have been sent to the wrong place? Maybe it belongs to one of your old neighbors? But Evelyn was already shaking her head. No, Angela. The letter, it fits. It matches our circumstances too perfectly to be a coincidence. Angela sighed, her expression torn between hope for her sister and fear of seeing her hurt again. Evelyn, the letter could mean anything. Families go through all kinds of situations and arrangements. Maybe. A shrill whistle from the kettle interrupted her. Angela excused herself to tend to it, leaving Evelyn alone at the table with the letter and the ultrasound photo. As the sound of Angela preparing tea drifted from the kitchen, Evelyn found herself studying the letter again, her mind racing with possibilities. Should she go back to New York and bring this new evidence to the police? Would they even take it seriously after all this time? From the kitchen, Angela called out, "Let's not rush into anything, Evelyn. Even if this letter is from Lola, why would she send an ultrasound photo after 22 years with such a cryptic message? Maybe they're happy and well. Maybe they left on purpose. Maybe there's no crime or horrible secret behind their disappearance." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. Are you saying they just left me? Because of the arguments? Because of our complicated family life? Angela's voice was gentle but steady as she returned with 2 steaming mugs of tea. What I mean is, maybe you just have to come to terms with it. We can't change what happened, but we can choose how we move forward. Evelyn sat in silence, her finger absently tracing the edge of the ultrasound image. She suddenly realized it wasn't entirely glued down. Curiosity sparked, and she carefully peeled it back. On the reverse side, faintly printed, were the words Starlight Medical Center. Her hands trembled as she put on her reading glasses, squinting to make out the details. With a surge of determination, she grabbed her phone and searched for the facility. Her heart leapt when the results popped up, Starlight Medical Center located in San Diego, California. In that moment, Evelyn felt a newfound sense of purpose. This wasn't just a coincidence, it was a lead. The first real lead she'd had in over 2 decades, and it was right here in California, where she had just moved. She stood abruptly, startling Angela, who had just set down their tea. Evelyn, Angela said cautiously, you're not planning anything reckless, are you? Evelyn's voice was steady, her resolve clear. I'm not involving the police. Not yet. But I am going to this hospital, Starlight Medical Center. I have to know, Angela. I have to try. Angela glanced at the back of the peeled photo, then at her sister, her expression a mix of concern and resignation. You're my big sister, and I'll support whatever decision you make. But please be prepared for anything. I can't bear to see you broken again. Not after all these years of rebuilding yourself. Evelyn nodded firmly. I can't ignore this, Angela. Not if there's even the slightest chance that Lola and Matthew are here in California. Angela sighed and stood up. All right then, but I'm coming with you. There's no way I'm letting you drive. As they gathered their things and headed for the door, Evelyn felt a swirl of emotions, fear and hope battling in her chest. After 22 years of darkness, a faint light had appeared. Whether it would lead to answers or more questions remained to be seen. But for the first time in years, Evelyn Harper felt the stirrings of real hope. The drive to Starlight Medical Center was short, only about 15 minutes, but to Evelyn it felt like hours. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white with tension. Angela sat beside her, occasionally giving directions as Evelyn struggled with the GPS and her unfamiliarity with the area. When they finally pulled into the hospital parking lot, Evelyn's heart raced. The building loomed before them, its windows gleaming in the afternoon sun. It looked both welcoming and intimidating, a place of healing, but also one that could hold devastating truths. Stepping out of the car, Evelyn clutched the envelope containing the letter and ultrasound images. Angela placed a comforting hand on her arm as they approached the entrance. The automatic doors slid open with a soft hiss, ushering them into the cool, sterile air of the hospital. The bustling lobby was alive with activity, nurses rushing past with clipboards, visitors pacing, and the hum of announcements over the PA system. Evelyn made a beeline for the reception desk, Angela close on her heels. A young man in scrubs looked up as they approached, offering a polite smile. "Good afternoon. How can I help you?" Evelyn took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Hi. I'm looking for information about a patient here. Her name is Lola Harper." The receptionist's fingers flew over his keyboard as he checked the system. After a moment, he shook his head. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we don't have any current patients by that name." Evelyn's heart sank, but she wasn't ready to give up. She pulled the ultrasound image from the envelope. "What about this? It has your hospital's name on the back." The receptionist studied the image carefully, his eyebrows lifting slightly as he read the details. "This ultrasound belongs to a patient named Nain Colton," he said, glancing back at Evelyn. "Nain Colton?" Evelyn repeated, the unfamiliar name feeling strange on her tongue. "Can you tell me anything about her? Is she a patient here?" The receptionist's expression became guarded. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I can't provide patient information unless you're a family member." "Are you related to Miss Colton?" Evelyn hesitated, unsure how to respond. I don't know for sure," she admitted softly. "This letter and ultrasound came in the mail, and I think she might be my daughter. You see, we were separated a long time ago." The young man's face softened with sympathy, but he shook his head. "I understand this must be difficult, but without proof of a family relationship, I can't disclose any information about Miss Colton or her medical records. I'm really sorry." He handed the ultrasound back to Evelyn, her hands trembling as she took it. Evelyn and Angela stepped away from the desk, moving to a quiet corner of the lobby. "It must be a mistake," Angela said softly, trying to reassure her sister. "Maybe the mail really was sent to the wrong address." Evelyn nodded numbly, her mind spinning with possibilities. They had come so far, she couldn't give up now. The shared birth date of Nain and Lola echoed in her mind, an unanswered question that wouldn't let go. As they moved toward the exit, Evelyn's eyes scanned the lobby, darting from face to face in search of something, anything, that might offer a clue. Suddenly, she noticed a nurse helping a patient in a wheelchair outside the sliding doors. As the nurse turned to head back inside, Evelyn made a split-second decision. "Excuse me," she called, hurrying toward her. "I'm sorry to bother you, but my daughter left her purse here a few days ago. I was wondering if you might have seen it." The nurse, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, paused and smiled. "Of course. I'd be happy to help. What's your daughter's name?" Evelyn's mind raced. "Her name is Nain Colton," she said, the name feeling foreign in her mouth. Then, as if by afterthought, she added, "But we often call her Lola." Angela frowned at this small deception but stayed silent, her eyes filled with concern. The nurse furrowed her brow, thinking, "I'm sorry, I don't recognize those names offhand. We see so many patients, you understand. Can you describe hers?" Evelyn nodded, her imagination spinning as she tried to picture Lola as an adult. "She has dark blonde hair, deep blue eyes, and a dimple in her right cheek when she smiles. She's also pregnant. She's in her 3rd trimester." Recognition lit up the nurse's face. "Oh, yes. I think I know who you mean. There's a woman matching that description who's been coming in for ultrasounds recently. I've seen her a few times in the past few weeks." Evelyn's heart leaped. Could it really be Lola? After all these years? The nurse continued, "I haven't worked with her personally, but I've seen her around. I think she's been coming in regularly for checkups." Hope surged through Evelyn. This was the closest she'd been to finding Lola in over 2 decades. Before she could ask more, the nurse gestured for them to follow. "Come with me. If your daughter left something, it would be in our lost and found." As they followed the nurse through the maze-like corridors of the hospital, Evelyn's mind raced. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine seeing her daughter again, maybe even holding her grandchild. But as they neared the lost and found, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered, Asterisk, what if this is all a mistake? What if Lola doesn't want to be found? What if the answers only lead to more heartbreak? Asterisk, Evelyn pushed the thoughts aside. She had come too far to turn back now. Whatever lay ahead, she would face it. Sure. Here's a rephrased version of the script with the same style and tone. She's under the care of Dr. Teresa Norris in obstetrics and gynecology. Evelyn nodded, trying to mask her surprise and relief. Yes, that's right, she said. The last time a lost belonging was registered under the name Nain Colton was about 3 months ago. The attendant continued, Are you sure it was only a few days ago? Evelyn's mind scrambled for an explanation. Oh, I see. Well, maybe someone else came across it and took it. The attendant gave a polite but measured response. If any of the hospital staff found it, they would have brought it here to the lost and found. But if another visitor found it, there's a chance they might have decided to keep it. Unfortunately, we can't guarantee what happens in those cases. Evelyn nodded, her expression softening. I see. Okay, I'm sorry for the confusion. The attendant smiled kindly. No problem at all. I'm sorry we couldn't be of more help. As they walked away from the lost and found office, Angela grabbed Evelyn's arm again. Evelyn, let's go home for real this time. We're taking this too far. We shouldn't be lying about being family to someone we know nothing about. Evelyn turned to her sister, her eyes pleading. Angela, Lola, and Nain share the same birth date. The letter was sent to my address. This can't all be a coincidence. Angela sighed, torn between sympathy and concern. I know you, Eve. You don't give up easily, but please be careful. Lying about identity and family relationships is illegal. We could get into serious trouble. Evelyn nodded, acknowledging her sister's words. I understand the risks, Angela, but I have to see this through. I've waited 22 years for any sign of Lola. I can't walk away now. She paused, then added, All right, let me try one more time. We'll go to Dr. Teresa Norris's office and see what we can find. If we can't get more information, I promise we'll head home. Angela met her gaze, soft but firm. Okay, but please, no more lying, Eve. They continued down the corridor toward the maternity section, the hospital bustling around them. As they approached a door marked Dr. Teresa Norris, obstetrics and gynecology, Evelyn suddenly froze. A man and a woman with dark blonde hair were entering the office. Evelyn could only see the woman from behind, but something about her posture, the way she moved, struck a deep chord within her. Before the door closed completely, Evelyn heard the doctor's voice. Good afternoon, Mr. Evans and Mrs. Colton. Evelyn's heart raced. Could it really be Nain? She started toward the door, but Angela held her back. Evelyn, no. You can't just barge in there. I just want to get a better look, Evelyn pleaded. Her hair color, it's the same as Lola's. Reluctantly, Angela released her grip, and they moved closer to the door. Evelyn peered through the narrow gap in the blinds covering the window. The doctor had dimmed the main lights, leaving only a softer lamp glowing. The LCD monitor displayed the ultrasound, casting a bright light over Nain's belly as the doctor carefully moved the scanner. When Nain turned her head slightly, Evelyn gasped. The woman's profile, the curve of her nose, the set of her jaw, it was achingly familiar. Even after 22 years, even with the changes that come with adulthood, Evelyn recognized her daughter. It's her, Evelyn whispered, her voice choked with emotion. It's really Lola. I'm 100% sure of it. Angela, who had been keeping watch, tensed. Evelyn, we need to handle this carefully. We don't want to upset Lola or cause a scene. Before Evelyn could respond, the nurse from earlier approached them with a warm smile. Hi. Did you find your daughter's purse? She asked kindly. Evelyn was taken aback, her mind racing. She shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. No, we didn't. The nurse furrowed her brow in confusion. That's odd. Nain is actually inside with Dr. Norris right now. There must have been some misunderstanding about the lost item. Evelyn's heart raced with this confirmation of Lola's identity. She looked at Angela, seeing the same mix of shock and uncertainty in her sister's eyes. They stood at a crossroads, the weight of 22 years of separation hanging in the balance. In that moment, something inside Evelyn snapped. 22 years of grief, uncertainty, and longing surged into a wave of desperate courage. Before Angela or the nurse could react, Evelyn lunged forward, reaching for the door handle. "Excuse me, ma'am, you can't." "Evelyn, stop." Angela's voice broke through, but her words were drowned out by the pounding of Evelyn's heart. The door swung open, and Evelyn stumbled into the dimly lit room. Dr. Teresa Norris looked up from the ultrasound machine, her face a mix of surprise and confusion at the sudden intrusion. Mr. Evans, who the doctor had referred to earlier, stood protectively by his wife's side, his body tensing as he assessed the unexpected visitor. "What's going on?" Dr. Norris demanded quickly, wiping the ultrasound gel from Nain's belly and helping her sit up. Evelyn stood frozen, her eyes locked on the woman on the examination table. Lola. Her Lola. Lola looked back at her with a mixture of confusion and alarm. "I'm sorry," Evelyn began, her voice trembling. "I'm Evelyn. I'm your mom." The room fell silent. Lola's eyes widened in recognition, then narrowed in disbelief. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "After all this time, why are you here now? How did you come to find me?" Evelyn took a hesitant step forward, her hands outstretched. "I just read your letter this morning, sweetheart. The ultrasound. I had to come find you." Lola's face crumpled, a storm of emotions flashing across her features. "I sent those letters last week," she said, her voice rising. "I never expected you to actually come. You never came before. I just moved to California." Evelyn explained hurriedly. "I was so busy with the move. I didn't check my mail until today." "Lola, please don't call me that." Lola snapped. "My name is Nain. Nain Colton." Caleb moved closer to his wife, his posture protective. "I think you should leave," he said firmly to Evelyn. "You're scaring her." But Evelyn couldn't move. She was rooted to the spot, drinking in the sight of her daughter after so many years. "Lola Nain," she corrected herself. "I don't understand. Why did you change your name? Why, after 22 years of leaving me, did you decide to reach out now?" Nain let out a bitter laugh. "Me? Leave you? Is that what you think happened?" She shook her head in disbelief. "I've sent you dozens, probably hundreds of letters over the years. You never replied. You never came to find me. Dad told me you didn't want to see us anymore because you had a new family. You left us." Evelyn felt as if the floor had dropped out from beneath her. "What? No. That's not Lola. You were so little back then. You and your father disappeared that day at the beach. I've been searching for you ever since." Confusion clouded Nain's features. "What are you talking about? That's not what happened at all." Dr. Norris, who had been watching the exchange with growing concern, stepped forward. "I think we all need to calm down. This is clearly a very emotional situation, but we need to consider Nain's condition. Stress isn't good for her or the baby." Evelyn nodded, trying to compose herself. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to burst in like this. It's just, I've been waiting for so long, hoping to hear anything about you. I never received any letters. Lola, I lived alone all this time, searching for you. I just moved in with your Aunt Angela." At the mention of Angela's name, Nain's expression softened slightly. "Aunt Angela, she's here too?" As if on cue, Angela appeared in the doorway, slightly out of breath. "I'm here, sweetheart," she said, her voice gentle. "I'm so sorry for all this confusion, but please, believe your mother. She spent so many years living in misery, just thinking about you, longing for the day you and your dad would come back." The tension in the room was palpable as everyone tried to process the conflicting stories. Nain looked from Evelyn to Angela, her brow furrowed in confusion and distress. "I don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. "Dad always told me that, Mom, that you didn't want anything to do with us anymore. He said you had a new family, that you'd moved on." Evelyn shook her head vehemently, tears streaming down her face. "No, sweetheart. Never. I've spent every day of the last 22 years hoping, praying to find you and your father. I never stopped looking. Never stopped loving you." Sensing the delicate nature of the situation, Norris gently intervened. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private, Nain. Your blood pressure is elevated, and I'm concerned about the stress this might be causing you and the baby." Caleb, who had been silently watchful throughout the exchange, spoke up. "I think that's a good idea, Nain. Honey, what do you want to do?" Nain looked at her husband, then back at Evelyn and Angela, her hand protectively resting over her swollen belly. "To think I need some answers. But not here. Not like this." Just then, the door burst open once more. A man with graying hair and familiar features rushed in, his eyes wild with panic. "Nain, I got your message. What's wrong? Is the baby okay?" The man froze, taking in the scene before him, his eyes locking with Evelyn's for a moment. Time seemed to stand still. "Matthew." Evelyn breathed, her voice barely audible. "Matthew, how did you find us?" Nain's eyes darted between her parents, realization dawning on her face. "Dad, what's going on? You told me Mom left us. That she didn't want us anymore." Matthew's expression crumpled, the weight of 2 decades of lies visibly crushing him. I can explain," he stammered, but before he could continue, Nain let out a sharp gasp, doubling over in pain. Dr. Norris rushed to her side, concern etched on her face. "Everyone, please exit the room," she instructed, quickly examining Nain. Evelyn watched from the window as the doctor's experienced hands moved efficiently. Her thoughts were with her daughter. She could hardly believe that beyond the door, her daughter, the little girl she had mourned for 22 years, was about to become a mother herself. After a few tense moments, Dr. Norris walked out of the room and looked up at the anxious faces surrounding the door. "Nain is experiencing some strong contractions, but it appears to be false labor," Dr. Norris explained. "However, her mucus plug has fallen, which is a sign that labor could begin soon. Given that she's 37 weeks along, we need to keep her for observation. The baby could come at any time now." Caleb, who had been standing protectively by Nain's side, visibly relaxed at this news. "It's crucial that we keep Nain calm and stress-free. Too much excitement or anxiety could trigger actual labor," Dr. Norris added. Her words hung in the air, reminding everyone of the delicate situation they were in. Evelyn, Matthew, and Angela exchanged worried glances, the weight of their unresolved issues pressing down on them. Dr. Norris adjusted Nain's position on the bed and set up a fetal monitor. "I'll be back to check on you regularly," she said to Nain. "Try to rest and please everyone keep things calm and quiet." As the doctor left the room, an uneasy silence fell over the group. Nain's eyes moved from face to face, lingering on Evelyn and Matthew. Despite the physical discomfort she was in, her expression was one of determination. "I want to know everything," she said, her voice steady, more determined than before. "I don't care if I go into labor right now, just no more lies. No more half-truths. I need to understand what happened all those years ago." Evelyn and Matthew exchanged a look. Matthew nodded, a silent acknowledgement that it was time to come clean. "Sweetheart," Evelyn began, her voice thick with emotion, "I never left you. I never stopped looking for you. That day at the beach, when you and your father disappeared, my world fell apart." Nain's brow furrowed in confusion. "But Dad said I lied." Matthew interrupted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I took you away, Nain. I made up the story about your mother leaving us." Matthew sat hunched over, his face buried in his hands. The weight of his deception seemed to physically crush him, making him appear older and more frail than his years. Angela stood between them, a buffer in the storm of emotions. The room fell silent as the weight of Matthew's confession settled over them. Nain's eyes widened in disbelief, then narrowed with anger. "Why?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "Why would you do that?" Matthew raised his head slowly, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with a mixture of shame and resignation. He took a deep breath before speaking. "I had given up on our marriage," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Even before that trip, I had initially planned to ask for a divorce. Evelyn felt as if she'd been struck. Divorce? But why didn't you just talk to me? Matthew shook his head. I was afraid. Afraid that you would win custody of Lola. You had a stable job, the house was in your name, and well, you're her mother. I knew I wouldn't stand a chance in court. He paused, running a hand through his graying hair. So, I decided to disappear with Lola. I looked for any opportunity during our trip to escape with her. I had it all planned out, new identities, a fresh start. Evelyn listened in stunned silence as Matthew continued. Lola, you had a hard time with the separation. You cried constantly. At first, I had to make up a story that would make you stop asking for your mother. So, I told you that she had escaped with our camper to live with her new family. Angela, who had been silent until now, spoke up. How could you do that, Matthew? How could you let Evelyn suffer all these years thinking her child was missing or worse? Matthew's shoulders sagged further. I know it was wrong. I know that now. But at the time, I convinced myself it was the only way. I was selfish and scared, and I made a terrible mistake. Evelyn's mind was reeling. All these years, she had imagined countless scenarios of what might have happened to her family, but this deliberate deception was beyond anything she had considered. The letters, Evelyn said suddenly. Lola, Nain said she sent me letters. What happened to them? Matthew's face crumpled with guilt. I intercepted them. Every single one. I told her I was mailing them, but I kept them hidden. I was afraid that if you knew where we were, you'd take her away from me. The room fell silent as the enormity of Matthew's deception sank in. The only sound was the steady beep of the fetal monitor, a reminder of the new life about to enter this complicated family dynamic. Nain felt a surge of anger, unlike anything she'd ever experienced. You had no right, she said, her voice shaking with emotion. No right to make that decision for all of us. Do you have any idea what you've done? The pain you've caused. Caleb, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. Nain, honey, remember what the doctor said. You need to stay calm. Nain took a deep breath, visibly trying to control her emotions. How am I supposed to stay calm? She asked, her voice trembling. My whole life, it's been built on lies. Angela, who had been standing quietly in the corner, stepped forward. Nain, she said gently, I know this is overwhelming, but right now you need to focus on yourself and your baby. There will be time to sort through all of this later. Evelyn nodded in agreement. Your aunt is right, she said softly. We have so much to talk about, but right now your health and the baby's health are the most important things. Nain looked down at her belly, then back up at the faces surrounding her. Her expression was a mixture of anger, confusion, and a glimmer of something that might have been hope. The fetal monitor beeped increasingly louder with each passing second. Everyone's eyes rested on it, and Caleb darted outside to call the doctor. I don't even know what to think anymore, Nain said, but I do know one thing. I don't want my child to grow up in a web of lies like I did. Matthew stood up, his face etched with remorse. Nain, I know I can never make up for what I've done, but I want you to know that despite my terrible choices, I love you. I always have. Nain's eyes met her father's, and for a moment, the anger in them softened. I love you too, Dad, she said quietly, but I don't know if I can trust you anymore. Just then, Dr. Norris returned to check on Nain. As she examined her patient, she looked around at the emotional faces in the room. I hope you've all been keeping things calm in here, she said, her tone gently admonishing. Nain managed a small smile. We're trying, she said. It's not easy, but we're trying. Dr. Norris nodded approvingly. Good. Because it looks like things are progressing. Nain, you're starting to dilate. It might still be a while, but I think this baby is getting ready to make an appearance. She paused, her tone shifting slightly. Given the specific circumstances, I would advise everyone except Nain's husband to exit the room to ensure there's enough space and calm for the labor process. The tension in Nain's hospital room was palpable as her contractions intensified. With Dr. Norris's warning that only one person would be allowed to stay in the room during the birth, everyone else was preparing to leave. Nain, her face contorted with pain, suddenly spoke up. Dad, I don't want to see you anymore, she said, her voice strained but resolute. I don't want you to hold my baby. After everything, Matthew's face fell, a mixture of hurt and shock evident in his expression. Nain, please. I know I've made mistakes, but I'm still your father. Nain shook her head, gritting her teeth through another contraction.
No.
What you did. I can't forgive that. Not now. Maybe not ever. The room fell silent. The only sound was the steady beep of the fetal monitor. Matthew stood frozen for a moment, then, without a word, turned and left the room, the door closing softly behind him. Evelyn nodded, though her heart ached to stay with her daughter. Nain, we'll be right outside if you need us. As Evelyn and Angela prepared to leave, Nain called out, her voice strained with another contraction. Mom, Aunt Angela, please don't let Dad see the baby. I don't want him to meet his grandchild. Not after everything he's done. Evelyn and Angela exchanged a worried glance but nodded. We understand, sweetheart, Evelyn said softly. Try to focus on your breathing now. We'll take care of everything else. As they exited the room, they found Matthew pacing in the hallway, his face a mask of anguish. When he saw them, he rushed over. How is she? Can you convince her, please? Evelyn took a deep breath, steeling herself for the difficult conversation ahead. Matthew, Nain doesn't want you to see the baby. She's asked us to make sure you don't meet your grandchild. Matthew's face contorted with anger and pain.
What? No, you can't do that.
You can't keep me from my grandchild. It's not our decision, Angela interjected, trying to calm the situation. It's what Nain wants. We have to respect her wishes. Matthew's demeanor suddenly changed. His body tensed with rage. This is your fault, he shouted at Evelyn. You've turned her against me. Before anyone could react, Matthew's hand flew out, striking Evelyn hard across the face. The sound of the slap echoed through the hallway. Evelyn stumbled back, shocked, as Angela quickly moved to support her. Hospital staff, alerted by the commotion, rushed to the scene. Security, a nurse called urgently. Within moments, security guards arrived, quickly assessing the situation. One of them approached Matthew, who was still seething with anger. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to calm down and step back. Evelyn, her cheek red and stinging, looked at Matthew with a mixture of fear and determination. I want him arrested, she said firmly. He assaulted me. And he kidnapped our daughter for 22 years. Call the police. The security guard nodded, speaking into his radio to request police presence. Matthew, realizing the gravity of the situation, seemed to deflate, the anger leaving him as quickly as it had come. Evelyn,